Hello everyone, and welcome to The Power of Peer Support for Pregnant and Parenting Women Affected by Substance Use, a session in our 25th Anniversary Lessons Learned series. My name is Pao Crego, and I work at the National Abandoned Infants Assistance Resource Center, located at the University of California at Berkeley. Our mission here at AIA is to enhance the quality of social and health services delivered to children and families affected by substance use and HIV, by providing quality training, information, and resources to the professionals who work directly with these families. This session will be presented by Debra Bercuvitz and Julie Gagne. Debra Bercuvitz is currently the coordinator of the Perinatal Substance Use Initiative for the Bureau of Family Health and Nutrition of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. Ms. Bercuvitz was formerly the director of Fresh Start in Western Massachusetts, a collaboration between the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and Children and Families. Prior to her work with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, she evaluated both local and national behavioral health projects as a contract researcher. She is a certified recovery coach and is a trained mother, woman, and Circle of Security parenting facilitator. Our second presenter, Julie Gagne, is currently the Transitional Family Support Specialist at Square One, where she works with currently and previously incarcerated women doing care coordination and running parenting groups. Prior to this, she worked as a family support specialist in outpatient mental health services and residential treatment for pregnant and parenting women and with Fresh Start. She has provided peer support for 7 years as a woman in long-term recovery and helped found a local NA meeting with child care for mothers in recovery. She loves working with mothers and children and will be completing her bachelor's degree this fall from Cambridge College. Before we begin, I want to remind you that you may ask questions via the chat feature in the lower left portion of your screen. We will answer questions at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to chat them in at any point. And now I'd like to turn it over to our presenters. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Pao. This is Debra.
And I'm Julie.
Hi. And we want to thank the AIA Resource Center for this wonderful opportunity. It's so exciting to think about 2 days of webinars on the topics related to serving families with substance use disorders and HIV infection. So we're going to begin by going over, just giving a brief overview of the Fresh Start program so you have an understanding of the context in which our peer support workers were working. And I'm going to do more of the overview, and then Julie's going to talk more about using peer mentors as staff. Fresh Start was located in Western Massachusetts in an area that's both rural and there are two cities also. And it was funded by the Children's Bureau between 2008 and 2012. It was a home visiting program working with pregnant women and new parents affected by substance use disorders and their children. Fresh Start also included an extensive cross-training initiative as well as community-based groups for women and their children, which we'll talk about a little while later. And Julie and I would both like to thank Debbie Flynn-Gonzalez, who was the supervisor at Fresh Start, for both her incredible work in the program and also her work helping prepare this webinar. So can I ask, can people find their hand-raising icon on your screen, or Pao, can you help people find that? I'd like to know how many people either use peer staff in your program or how many of you are peer staff. Let's see, we have one hand raised, three, what a fun little thing.
4.
Okay, well that's going, I'm going to keep going, and then I'll let you know. And for those of you who either work as peer staff or who have had peer staff in your program, feel free to jump in. I'm going to move ahead to give you a little picture of what the women were facing who came into the program. And what I particularly want to draw your attention to here, there are a lot of challenges that people encountered in their lives. There's a lot of trauma history, But I want you to particularly look at the fourth item, which is experiencing a termination of parental rights or equivalent for an older child. So of the families that were in our program, about 70% of them had lost permanent custody of other children. And so that was really a shadow that they were experiencing their current pregnancy or birth under. And we were working with women who were, about a third of them were pregnant when they were referred, and 2/3 of them had babies under 6 months. So it was a substance-exposed newborn program. And our referrals came from prenatal providers, from self-referral, and from our child welfare system. And so when you look at this, it's important to understand how comprehensive and trauma-informed a program needs to be able to be working with women who have had these many challenges. So we have, it looks like about 8 of you have used peers before. Well, hopefully after this webinar, you're all going to go run out and hire peers in your program because we're huge fans. But instead of just thinking about women as being this kind of constellation of their difficult life circumstances, while women came into the program often in a place where they were feeling scared, they were feeling ashamed, a lot of them were feeling hopeless about the possibility of their being able to keep custody of the children that they had just had or were about to have. We also saw women who were extremely motivated to parent, who had a lot of strength, and when they were given the opportunity to shine and to be able to see in themselves and have their peer workers help model for them the possibilities for themselves, we saw tremendous transformation. So engagement can be pretty difficult with this population, and one of the things that we'll say is that we're huge believers in the strength of using peers to engage women into services, women with substance use disorders. We define engagement as having met face-to-face with a family support specialist, which is what we called our peers, at least 4 times. And if somebody met with a family support specialist face-to-face once, 92% of them engaged in the program, which is pretty striking given past experiences with service providers and with engaging in services. And then we also had very high retention in services. This is just a look at placement of index children. So retaining custody of children is not always the best thing, and sometimes we worked with women where the work was around accepting that maybe they weren't at a point in their lives where they could give their children what they wanted to be able to give them, and so having somebody else take care of them was probably the best thing. But what we saw was that we had a lot of success. The women were able to make great changes through their work with their peers to end up having physical custody of their children. And one of the things that's different about our program, which I didn't say, is that this was not a clinical program. This program was, the primary intervention was the relationship with peers that the women had, both to help them navigate their recovery and their parenting, as well as navigate the services that they needed to be involved with. So how did we do it? Well, to give you a little picture of the services, we had 4 full-time family support specialists working with women. We had 1 therapist whose job was to provide either short-term therapy because we lived in an area where there were long wait lists, or to provide interim therapy. It was home-based therapy for people who weren't yet ready to access community-based services, but she was not doing long-term clinical work with the families. There was a supervisor and there was a director, and we had no staff turnover during the 4 years of our program. We had peer mentoring, support, and advocacy combined with short-term clinical guidance and treatment, and the peer staff provided intensive care coordination as well as direct recovery and parenting coaching, and the staff partnered with early intervention, which is our Part C services for kids with developmental delays or disabilities, child welfare, and substance use disorder workers to help the women that they were working with engage in those services also. And then we also had the last component of the program, which we'll talk more about, is that besides the peers providing peer support to the women they were working with, the families also had a chance to provide peer support to each other through the extensive group component of our project. This is a picture of Julie with somebody in our program.
I've lost 106 pounds, by the way.
Julie has just done an extraordinary job with her recovery. And the reason why I like to use this picture, there's tremendous joy in this relationship, and these women have a long history together that goes back before the program, and being able to see the changes that Julie was able to help this woman in the picture with the donut holder, Julie's the one on the right, was so much a function of the relationship that they had before, and then Julie being able to hold her experience, strength, and hope out for that person. But we had staff whose life experiences of addiction and recovery, as well as involvement with the child welfare system, incarceration, loss of custody of children, gave them the ability to relate to the women that they were working with in quite an extraordinary way. And because they had very different life experiences, we could also bring them in. We had many situations where people lost custody temporarily, and so a staff person who had gone through that could come in and meet with the person for as long as she needed to meet with them to kind of help them work through that process for themselves. Now Julie's going to go on to talk about benefits of being a peer mentor.
Yeah, why peer mentors? And so up above there is two bubbles, and these are actually statements that were made by people that we actually worked with. And I'm going to talk, I want to talk about building relationships and how that really, the funny thing is many of the people in the recovery community is small. So like many of these people I knew pre-recovery. Many of them, I actually used with or was incarcerated with at one point in time. And that, may sound like really a hard thing to navigate through. But actually what I found, it was a blessing because I was able to show them that, like, yeah, I've been through all that. I went through all, working through the shame and the guilt and the feelings behind using and losing my children. But I found a way to stay clean, and this is what I've done so far. So I was able to give them that support and navigate through those situations, because there was times where they'd be like, hey, you remember when we went here? And I was able to redirect them, and we didn't have to go down that dark path. We already went down that path before. Let's try some. I say, hey, why don't we try some new memory? Let's go to a group. Let's go to a meeting. That was a really cool thing. Also, being able to talk to them in a language that they understand, but at the same time, being that person that is kind of a bridge in between other providers. Because like sometimes it's really intimidating, especially if they're, working with family service workers or something like that, to that nature, having to do things like, foster care reviews, being able to go with them and help them walk, even before that step, even, kind of coaching them through what they might have to, okay, this is what you should say, this is, maybe this is what you should do, this is how we should prepare for the situation, and being that support for them. Because we got to stop and remember, many of the people, this stuff didn't start with them. It's multi-generational, and so here's the thing, it's like their experience around meeting people with badges has never probably been a positive thing, throughout their whole life, So being that peer support and coming in and being that person, they're like, wait a minute, hold on, and so being able to build that relationship in that sense was really cool. And another thing, a peer mentor, I think, is a lot, because I'm not a clinician. I'm able to share my life experiences, in a way that is healthy with good boundaries, but also at the same time give them, that extra feedback, I guess. And I was sharing an example. Like I remember my first client, she was like, you don't know what it is to have to go to detox. I was like, yeah, I do. I've been to 37 of them. So, and I mean, that's not something, any other kid. I don't think somebody that wasn't a peer support would be able to do in that sense. And we were able to talk about the fear of not being able to, the fear of going to detox, but also the fear about not using anymore, So, and she did go to treatment that day, which was a really big step for her because this was a young lady that was committed to, using. It was what it was. So, yeah, it was a really great thing. Our next slide is why peer mentors. I think we just touched on all this. it's the therapeutic value of one person helping another, one individual in recovery, and, and helping people realize that, like everybody has a story to tell. And realizing that, yeah, you might have used, but guess what? You have an opportunity to do something different. And like I said, usually it doesn't start with folks, but it can end with them. And giving them the tools and giving them the, being a cheerleader of it, in a sense, to help them realize that, their vision. Also, like I said, being able to talk to them in a language that they understand, and not being so clinical and just being there and validating their feelings, because like I said, a lot of times there's a lot of shame and guilt behind using. And something I always tell the ladies that I work with, if there's a name for it, that means somebody did it before you did. So don't feel guilty. Don't feel ashamed. So that's, I think, something that a peer support person is able to offer is that, opportunity for a person to identify, benefits for the program. So, like I said, I'm not just another provider, I'm just, I go in there, I tell them I feel very comfortable with you, I use language that they understand, but I also help them, realize that they have to raise the bar. But also, too, I'm like that, like I said, I'm that bridge in between, a peer support, in between the person that we're providing services for and other providers. And so, I remember when with my active addiction, I would go out and I would try to get meds, right? And of course, you got to go see a therapist. And I would go see these therapists, right, and not utilizing them for the tool that they were. And they would look at me like blank stares, and they would provide me with that therapeutic silence. I didn't understand that then. I just thought they were looking at me like I was crazy. And I'd be like, why are you staring at me like that? Why is Matt's Health paying you to just look at me blankly? I didn't understand that. So, but I'm able to convey information like that. Now I'm able to talk to the ladies or the families that I provide services for and say, hey, they're not just staring at you like you're crazy. They're actually giving you an opportunity to be able to vent and to be able to talk about things. And so it's a really cool, opportunity to teach people some of the clinical aspects behind some of those services that can be very intimidating for them. Because it's helping them build that trust, that probably that distrust that existed way before they came along, being able to understand that not everybody's out to get them, and being that support that they need. And it does make a big difference. Another thing I want to talk about is being able to, be that, most of the folks that come into treatment, the relationships, okay, yeah, they're lovely, right? They've not, they probably have not a lot of modeled, healthy relationships in their life. So, I know for me, with the women that were, for me, that was the first experience with intimacy. And, in a healthy way and with boundaries, it's a really beautiful tool. And it was able to show people that intimacy is not just sleeping with somebody. It's when two spirits connect. And that's where, the real healing begins, and the real, you start talking about more than new sports and weather. You're talking about real deal stuff, And I think that's very important. And also a big another thing about peer support was that, because I'm able to build the relationships with people, because I was able to help them, I would do things like, I had one young lady that she had to take the bus to go to work. And what I would do is, instead of going to give her rides, what I did was park my car. I was able to devote some time to her, because sometimes, other service providers, they're not able to do this, So, I was able to park my car, teach her how to take the bus in a timely manner, and, because it's like the analogy. I can teach you I can fish for you and feed you, or I can teach you how to fish and you can feed yourself. And I think it was really important for other providers to understand that you're there to help, or there to whatever, be, it's a teamwork thing. Because very, very early on in Fresh Start, I was taught collaboration. And it's really important for me to be in sync, not just with the families that I'm serving, but also with the other providers. You want to talk about the challenges for the program?
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges from a programmatic perspective. And I also want to make clear, by the way, somebody had a great comment here in the chat about their own experience, is that in our program, the peer staff were not, people in recovery were not just the peer staff, but that was really explicitly their role, was that they were there to be connecting as a person in recovery, but that people in recovery are in all positions in these programs. So I want to talk a little about supervision needs, and we'll talk about it a bit later, but having enough dedicated resources to supervision was a big learning experience for us, and part of that's also about the work history that people bring. So we were looking for people who had been in recovery for a couple years, and we had a pretty wide range of people who had never worked in an office setting or kind of hadn't had a regular day-to-day job, to people who had. So there were a lot of needs that we hadn't predicted around supervising relative to how to do paperwork, how to keep your email and your Outlook up to date, kind of just general ways to be in an office setting. And I know that there are programs at Staff with Peers that look for people who have significantly more full-time work experience than we did. For us, we were just waiting for the angels to sing when we interviewed people. Let me tell you, the angels were like in full blast when Julie walked in the room. That we were very, so that was not for us. We weren't looking for a relevant job history, but it did lead to some more intense supervision needs, and so really being able to dedicate enough resources to supervision. And then, do you want to talk a little bit about acculturation?
Yeah. So acculturation, sometimes I like to, because I remember when I first, one of my challenges was I used to go into supervision all the time, and I used to be like, at first, my chase would get heavy because I never really did work in that kind of setting. I ran a sewing machine for 3 years prior to working at Fresh Start. And honestly, when I would go in and I'd be like, and I would second guess some of the things that I was doing, and my supervisor was she was very strength-based with her supervision with me. And, but it helped me understand how important it is as a woman in recovery that it's okay to raise the bar for myself. And this is what, I talk about with my families and the other women in recovery is like, sometimes it can be a lonely place. You're going to find yourself raising the bar for yourself, and you might leave some people behind. But at the same time, understanding, I never forget where I came from. And it's a nice balance because I've had other women, my mentor who passed away in November, she was a woman who navigated beautifully through this. She never forgot who she was, but at the same time, she always pressed the importance of raising the bar, the importance of, real integrity is when nobody's looking. So these are the things that I try to pass on to those families that I work with. It's okay, never, because, listen, you can take the person out, they took me out the ghetto, but they're never going to take the ghetto out of me. But that doesn't mean, that doesn't mean I can't polish and refine myself and take what I already have and make it, use it to my advantage and make me a better person. And that's the same thing when I talk about the language and the things that I pass on to the families that I work with. Those are some of the things. And I think acculturation, it sometimes can be very tricky for peer support because you're not the same as other folks, but at the same time, navigating through it can be a little tricky, you can't forget, but at the same time, you got to always raise the bar, Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, that sounds great. So in terms of personal lives, when people have been living with addiction, it often leads to financial problems. People's education can be interrupted, and there are often a lot of health issues that come along with having an addiction history. And what we learned was that, everybody in the program, nobody comes into a work environment without having, everybody has their story, but in some work environments, you really have to check it at the door. And we had a work environment that didn't expect that for anybody in the program. So we did a lot of personal sharing about what was going on in our lives outside our program. We had a big spiritual basis for ourselves as staff, kind of in terms of self-care. And so we needed to recognize that people, everybody was bringing stuff from their own lives, and that was just part of our work life. And sometimes it took more time than any of us might have expected to get through something that any one of us was going on. But we really did allow for time for personal leave, to be able to attend a doctor's appointments, to get teeth fixed, dealing with depression, having trouble getting into the office, whatever it was. Those were all things that we needed to allow space for.
I just want to say those were not my issues.
Some of those were my issues. You want to talk about boundaries? Boundaries is like yes. So, and listen, in the beginning, if I could have took everybody home with me, I probably would have. So thank God for supervision, and thank God for, people that really taught me about clinical support, and how, back to the analogy about teaching someone how to fish. So, like, good boundaries, what I found the best, what was effective, is if, I had to start it off with good boundaries. Like, just because I knew somebody, I couldn't let something slide. I really had to be a stickler and go across the board with stuff, Like, I couldn't be, and that's, none of my ladies or families that I work with, if you would, I never had favorites. You just really have to really treat people with mindfulness and respectfulness, and always putting those good boundaries in place. And sometimes it could be challenging, because I have worked with people where I've gone to meetings, or I've gotten a sponsor, and come to find out that same individual may have gone to those meetings and had a sponsor. And and just like any place else, like if somebody heard something you said, they may not keep it in the meeting, they might pass it on. And it can snowball. And and there was times where I felt like really offended, So what I had to do for my own personal well-being was, like, sometimes I had to change a sponsor. Was I happy about that? Absolutely not. But, it worked out in the end. And also, too, changing my meeting spots. And if I saw a person in there that I worked with, I really was mindful if I was sharing something, or if somebody asked me to share, I would, I'd have to second guess that and say, well, someone, I really tonight, I don't think I'm able to do that. And but what I found was when I worked out a regimen of, meetings out of the area, I was able to do that. Also, too, I want to talk about pathways to recovery. Now, so coming from my own personal recovery, like, abstinence was the key. That was the thing that was what caused people to experience true freedom from active addiction. I did not get different pathways. I was quite, very, one way was the only way. And I had a couple experiences around this. One of them was through my supervisor, Debbie Gonzalez. She's the one that told me, and this was like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. She explained to me, she said, around, like, talking about if a woman was on MAT treatment, she was like, so why is it not recovery? I'm like, well, they don't, she's not completely clean, And this is what, I said. And she said, well, what does recovery look like? And she explained the scenario to me. She said, well, what if a person, say that, they're pregnant for the 6th time, they've lost, their parental rights have been terminated 5 times prior, and they find out they're pregnant for the 6th time, and they go into treatment, and they get on they get on MAT treatment, and they're going to their meetings, and they're meeting with their doctors, they're going to their prenatal appointments, they're doing, they're eating balanced meals, they're really taking care of themselves and nurturing through their pregnancy. And all these beautiful, wonderful things are happening, and that is recovery, and like they're changing their way of thinking and their way of living. That's recovery.
So why is that not recovery? You know, so for me, to be able to effectively help people better, you know, I had to check my own personal recovery at the door and not press it on other people and, you know, embrace other ways of recovery. And another thing that really helped me was, and this is a very personal story, I met this young lady who was, you know, she got involved in a 12-step fellowship, and she was doing meetings. And what happened was she was really engaged, and she was super excited because she was chairing the meeting. And all the other group members found out that she was on methadone. And what happened was they, instead of doing it in a very loving, caring way, pulling her to the side, you know, they kind of confronted her on a group level, and, like, she was totally embarrassed. And 2 weeks later, they found her dead of an overdose. And that really, really resonated with my spirit, and it really made me change the whole way I look, my whole concept. So, but like I said, you know, like, my job as a peer support worker is to meet people where they're at all times. And, you know, and cheer them on. And really, if I'm, you know, working my own personal program, I lead by its attraction rather than promotion.
Great. Thank you. So hiring barriers can be another challenge for programs, and particularly for agencies that are either housed in schools or have something to do with early education and care or family services, because criminal offenses often accompany addiction, and human resources can be really touchy about who they are and aren't willing to hire. And on one hand, it gives us a great opportunity to be able to educate people about addiction and recovery, and to really encourage people to think about this isn't an us and them. There's almost nobody in this country that isn't touched by addiction in some way in their family or their friend circle, and, you know, help that person think compassionately about what they would want the hiring process to be if it was somebody that they cared about. But kind of on the flip side of that, besides that advocacy with the HR person, is to not put the peer in an uncomfortable situation when they're going into the hiring process. So there's really some preparatory work that needs to happen, because it's pretty miserable to have to go into a job interview and have somebody sitting there with all of your charges that might have been from, you know, 10 or 15 years ago when you're in a really different place in your life. And others of us who don't have that history, like, we're not getting dragged through the muck like that. And so to do that preparation with the HR person before, and to also be there as an advocate for the person that you're interested in hiring, and to make sure that the person is hireable beforehand, so that they don't get excited and get through this process and then find at the 11th hour that human resources is not going to be able to approve them as a candidate. Now we're going to move on to benefits and challenges for other professionals. So those are people in other agencies that we're working with. So the first one is modeling recovery for other service providers. Service providers who interact with people with addictions are often doing that at a time when people are in a really hard place in their lives. And it can be very hard for those service providers to see what might happen down the road with them, and to understand that recovery happens. And one of the things that we hadn't really thought about when we started the program was the effect that it was going to have on other professionals that were going to be interacting with our staff, that they got inspired. They started to be able to see the families that they were working with, particularly in the child welfare world, that they were able to see that, oh, this person could get into recovery. This person could end up like this person. We had some of our staff had been through our own child welfare system here, and so that was a very inspiring piece for other service providers.
Yeah, and, you know, in having other providers understand that we are an acceptable resource. Many of us know, you know, you got to stop and think about it, especially, you know, a lot of us, you know, we did the hustling thing. We know how to navigate through the system, you know, and so being able to connect people and have some, you know, other providers, you know, trust our judgment, to be able to trust us about how, that we're going to be able to connect people and help them access the needs, to be able to access the things that they need in order to thrive. You know, another thing is, though, what I found is a benefit, but also can be challenging is, you know, sometimes I found myself in a place where you know, it was a mixed bag for, you know, when other providers, especially child welfare workers, having me handle certain tasks. Like when there was a time when there was drug testing, you know, and, you know, having me to be like, you know, the urine police, you know, and it was just like, you know, sometimes that can hinder and alienate a person. And, you know, and I mean, I'm there to help and I believe in all that, but at the same time, it could still mess up our relationship. So what I found was effective was me making sure clearly when I was working with you know, like I said, communication and collaboration, making sure that when I was, what the expectations were of each other with other providers.
So, and I, you know, being a child welfare worker is it's a hard job.
Yes.
And we saw ourselves there as resources and as being that we all had the same agenda in mind for family stability and family recovery, but we did find sometimes that more with the peers than with the supervisor or the director in the program, but we certainly ended up also having our objectivity questioned, that sometimes the word advocate would be used a bit like a swear word, like we were advocating for the family. And the suggestion with that was that the peer staff wasn't concerned about child safety, that they wouldn't file on a family if necessary, that they were there and their primary thing was to protect the parent. And so we really did a lot of work around not only explaining to people that we're all concerned about child safety and family well-being, but that advocating for the family is actually advocating for the child that's in the welfare system, because the more that we can help strengthen those parents, the better it's going to be for the children in the end.
Could I add something real quick? And here's the thing that, you know, a lot of the providers didn't realize was there has been times where I had to file on a family, and the family was involved when I filed, because I was very honest with the people that I work with. I said, listen, I'm a mandated reporter, and if I ever had to file, I would never do it behind your back. I would do it right, you know. And usually we would file together, because I want to make sure that this family, that their strengths were recognized, you know. And I found that to be a positive experience.
So the last one is questioning expertise. So this was a challenge sometimes, where other colleagues would challenge the competence of the peer staff. And for the peer staff, sometimes it would make them question themselves, especially because a lot of their experience came from life experience and not from school. But I'll be the first one to say that you can have 10 different degrees and it doesn't give you any better skills or any better knowledge to be working and helping a family than having had lived experience. And so what we found ourselves as the supervisor and the director of the program is, in the same way that we want parents to be able to learn self-advocacy skills, is to not step in unless there was an unresolvable situation, but that through supervision, that to be able to help support the peers so that they could, they could show that they were incredibly competent to be handling that circumstance. People have to move a little faster so you can get into some of the group stuff.
Yes. Benefits of being a peer mentor. You know, like I said, it helps people raise the bar for themselves. You know, it's also, you know, it helps a person, you know, gain experience in the field. I've gotten an opportunity to enhance my already lived experience with this by working in the field, by going back into school and really getting a lot of training in different things, and really learning how to navigate around, you know, my, you know, barriers such as incarceration or, you know. So, you know, like a lot of these, you know, the benefits have really been really positive. But most of all, the most positive thing was the fact that, A, I got to see firsthand that it's not getting any better out there, and B, you know, like I can only keep what I have by giving it away. And like I said, you know, it's really, you know, when I have, as I was doing this as work, I found that it was really good for myself as well, for my own personal recovery.
Now we're going to talk a little about some of the things which we've referred to already, some of the things that help facilitate having peer mentors as staff. You want to start talking about supervision?
Oh, so supervision was really, like I said, the first 2 years of my job, I thought my boss was firing me every week. But it really helped me build strength. And she was very positive for me. Even when she pulled me up on the things that I was doing, she was very positive. So I really appreciated that. She was like the best supervisor in the world, and where my area challenge was the paperwork. And so she really helped. We did a lot of training around paperwork, not just her, but other, Debra and, and the clinical staff. They did a lot of training around that and was able to help us, you work out a system. There was a lot because I had to build a strategy around paperwork. So, and I still utilize that to this day. So, supervision was really super helpful.
So some other things is that we had time, we gave time in our workday for anybody, any staff member to see a therapist, to go to a 12-step meeting, whatever recovery supports they all needed. I have a real personal beef with the phrase paraprofessional because para is it's a somewhat word, and there's no difference in the professionalism and the expertise of everybody in our program. And so it's a word that we really avoided using as a descriptor for the staff. And in the same way, the first thing that people would always ask me when I was doing a presentation or anything, what's your degree? And years ago, I stopped putting my degree because it's important that in all ways we show that we want to prioritize experience and skills over school learning. We had peer staff do a lot of the outreach and training for the program, and that helped build their skills and also helped build their visibility in the community. And the one other thing I want to talk about is just thinking, it doesn't exactly fit under facilitators of peer mentors, but thinking about who is the peer, because one of the things about the peer staff that we chose in our program and the community that we chose to focus on is that in some ways it ended up, it wasn't culturally relevant for all pregnant or parenting women with substance use disorders. And in some ways, sometimes we felt like it reinforced the invisibility of substance use among women who had more formal education or who were living in wealthier communities. And so thinking about that to be a peer can come from any kind of background, and you just want that background matched well with who the people are that you're trying to reach out to.
Okay. So we're going to talk about peer group opportunities, and this is something I teach at in Chicopee at the women's jail, and I teach a intro to nurturing group, and I always share about this every, when I teach this class, how I remember many of these women, they came in, some of them knew each other, but many of them didn't, and there was walls up, right? And they were like, listen, they were looking at each other funny because, women don't trust other women, and so they were just like, and slowly but surely through the curriculum, through the guidance through the peer workers and people sharing on like I said, on a deeper level, things started to happen, walls started to come down, and I would leave the group because I lived right in the neighborhood, and I'd be driving home from work, and I'd see them walking together. I'd be like, where are you guys going? And they weren't going to cop drugs. They were going to a meeting. They were going to get WIC together. They were like, if someone didn't show up, they would call each other up, and the beautiful thing was after this meeting was done, they did this 16-week curriculum. What they did was they were like, what do we do next? And so they all got together, and with the help of one of my coworkers, Ms. Tina Rodriguez and Debbie Flynn Gonzalez, they were able to write a grant, which they did. They planned out the curriculum. They did everything, and they made their own group. And I love the group because I have the sign still. It was called Moms in the Hood, and they named the group too. And these women were so dedicated to this group. And I think recovery starts when people feel like a part of something. Many of us start using because we didn't. I remember, this is my own reflection, so but many people don't feel a part of something. There's that sense of, want to fill some kind of void, and I feel like being a part of that really started the ball going for many of those women. And one of those women actually is in long-term recovery and is working in the field now. So, and she happens to be one of my ladies, so I'm very super, I'm like proud mama. So it's a really good experience, and groups, like I said, these women stepped up to the plate, and they really did a fantastic job with this. Is there anything you want to add?
So just, yeah, that was great. Thank you. So we didn't actually think about groups. It wasn't really part of when we wrote our grant proposal for this project. We didn't really have groups on our radar screen, and so this was something that evolved. And it's always the beauty of having grant funding is that you're able to be really responsive to what you see. And one of the first things that we saw is that it was great having the peers do the home visiting, working with families in their homes, but a lot of people were really isolated. They were they were living in apartments where people were using around them. They didn't feel safe going out.
Right.
They didn't have places to go, and they definitely didn't have places to connect with each other. And a lot of them didn't really have, they didn't have relationships in recovery anymore. And so while that relationship starting with a peer was the first step, we really wanted to see them being, starting to build a community with each other. And so the group started from there. We did an infant massage group with early intervention, which was a way to help people get into early intervention. And we ended up, through our collaborations, 2 collaborations with early intervention, everybody in those groups ended up with early intervention services who hadn't before. As Julie said, we did the nurturing group for parents in substance abuse treatment and recovery, which is an adaptation from the Institute for Health and Recovery. We started we wanted to allow people to be able to access recovery supports, and we knew that child care was a big barrier. And so we started a drop-in child care service, and nobody used it. Well, part of the reason why nobody used it is because they had to take a number of buses to first drop their kid off and then get to whatever appointment, whatever recovery support they needed. But also, if you remember back, a lot of the women who were in our program had lost custody of their children in the past, and sometimes that had happened when kids were at child care or in school when they had been removed from the family. And so there's a lot of trauma with the idea of leaving a child behind. And so Julie did this beautiful job of starting an NA group specifically for moms in recovery, and there were 2 things that made this really different from any other group in the area. One was that we provided on-site child care. We had a lot of people coming to that meeting, and the other thing is we made the meeting medication-assisted treatment friendly. You heard Julie's story that she told before, and what we were hearing in the community was that there were a lot of women who were in methadone or on buprenorphine who wanted access to 12-step recovery supports. We did a lot of researching about kind of what was fact and what was fiction there. And we did outreach at all of the methadone providers in the community to let women know that this group was starting. And it was just another place where people could give peer support to each other. And then we also started a GED group. And the staff who were in our program led the groups. They facilitated them. They had rotating tasks of child care, transportation, food, facilitation, setup, and cleanup. Sometimes there were bad feelings about, somebody feeling like, oh, this person isn't pulling their weight, they didn't do their task. So, we definitely did some processing around that, and we found that it was very helpful to have clear roles, clear lists of all the things that had to do. And, when we had a group, we would know who was responsible for doing what for each time. And so the groups created a lot of opportunity for peer support and leadership, both for the peer staff and other moms.
Yeah. And I want to add, though, with the NA meeting, it was a challenge because, they have their own set of guidelines and their own set of, their traditions and concepts, and we had to navigate around that, and really we couldn't promote this was an MAP friendly meeting. However, it was an understanding that this place would be a safe place for them. Also, too, the group had to be fully self-supporting, so they had to pay for child care, which was through group when they passed the basket and stuff. So they were able to do that. And also they, as far as the other groups go, staff really did work that. But as far as the NA meeting was concerned, the women stepped up to the plate and they were the people that were in charge of that. Mm-hmm. So, they were the group members, and they really made sure that ran smoothly. And it's still going on to this day. It's kind of evolved into a different scenario. However, the essence is still the same.
So in the end, thinking about peers paying it forward, these women came through our program in different times, and we ended up holding a 5-day recovery coach academy. So these were all people who were natural leaders in the community who had stepped up in the program to do different things, and they got certified as recovery coaches so that they could provide more skilled support to other women. And just to give a little sense of the flexibility, we had child care during this. It was a big commitment because women cannot access what they need to be able to move forward in their lives without child care. One of the women here does not have very high literacy skills, and we had somebody actually sitting with her and kind of doing the verbal translation through the whole process, and she's somebody who has so much to offer other women in her community, and that investment was just incredibly worthwhile because of the peer leadership that she could give to other people around her. And I think we are ready for questions. Here's a quote. Just to take away, nobody can go back and start a new beginning, but anybody can start today and make a new ending. And it's time for questions. And here's our contact information that you can take down if you want to reach any of us. If you want to hire Julie, she's otherwise occupied already because everybody always wants to steal Julie away from us. So we're open for questions. If you want to ask them it looks like you have a couple questions here.
Great. Debra and Julie, thank you so much. Do you want to go ahead and read the questions? Would you like me to read them?
I can read them.
Great.
So somebody asked if you've seen this program instituted with other programs like the Nurse Family Partnership or Healthy Family. So my guess is that person is somehow related to the National Maternal and Infant Early Childhood Home Visiting Program, because I also work with that initiative in our state now. And we haven't, it's not to say that it would be an add-on, and so if you're working with any evidence-based model, you have to be in touch with the model developers to see whether or not it would work. But I think with any kind of home visiting program, there's always great benefit of adding on the peer component. And we have, in Massachusetts, we have the Early Intervention Partnership Program, which is not one of the federal evidence-based ones, but where we have a team working with the family, and one of them is a community health worker who's a peer to the women that they're working for, providing home visiting, maternal and infant home visiting services. So I believe that it's absolutely possible, and just with the thought in mind that some of the things that we talked about in terms of the supervision needs and being committed to being a good advocate so that your staff can feel well supported in the incredibly important work that they're doing. And then somebody else said, one of my biggest assets is being able to share with clients that aside from being the program manager and supervising a staff of 35 employees, I'm also in recovery and started in this system as a client and now have worked for the BHS department for 34 years. My ladies love it. I believe this gives them hope and a dream that they can do it too. I love cheering them on.
Well, I just want to cheer you on, Pamela.
That is fabulous to hear about that long-term recovery. And one of the things that did happen from our work is that all of us who worked in the program, did really make choices about coming out, about being in recovery from all different kinds of things, not just in our program but in other places in our lives, because we felt like it was we saw how much of a difference that it made to other people to get to see role models who were in a different place in their lives and willing to talk about things that had been hard for them.
Absolutely, because I can't, but we can, and it is, and what I've learned is the more when we talk about things, that's when the real healing goes on.
So, are there any other questions that people want to ask now?
so I actually have a question, if that's okay. So, you mentioned quite a bit about this idea of other providers mistrusting that peers are objective and that they have the adequate expertise because their experience isn't viewed as equal to like having a degree, for example. So I guess for Julie, how did you navigate this, and what kind of support did you get that really helped you navigate all of those dynamics?
Well, I had to be, listen, honesty was the key. Like, I was very honest with the people that I work with. I told them, listen, I'm here to support you and your family, but I was also honest with other providers. I really utilized my clinical support that I had. I embraced any kind of professional training. Like, I really committed myself to, learning more and raising the bar for myself. I hope that I answered the question. Because if I didn't have the answer to something, I really did not act. I was taught very early on, if you don't know what to do, you don't do nothing at all. So if I wasn't going to make a major decision without consulting my boss, if there was a situation that arose, I made sure that I talked to my boss about it. And the more I got into this practice, the more I found that I can, rely on my judgment, and I 99.9% of the time made the right judgment calls. So, I utilized my supports and took advantage of all the trainings that I could, I hope that answered what you were asking.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. So,
okay.
Is there anything that you two would like to add before we wrap up?
I want to thank you for this opportunity.
I would too, and I would actually love connections from people. So I do work with the Massachusetts Home Visiting Initiative now, and if there's anybody on this webinar who is thinking about integrating or who has integrated peer staff into the evidence-based models that are federally funded, I would love to get to talk to you about that. So please take my contact information and reach out to me.
Perfect. And we'll be sending out, if people don't have a chance to write down the contact info right now, we'll be sending out the slides right after this webinar, and you can get them there also. So,
thank you.
Debra and Julie, thank you so much for speaking with us today. This presentation was excellent. I also would like to thank everyone who attended this session. And before we end, just a reminder that we have other lessons learned sessions today and tomorrow, and you can register for them individually on our site. The site will pop up once you close this window. And thank you again, Debra and Julie. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of the webinar.
Yep.